Hello, Anna Maria. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Hello.
Excellent, I can hear you.
Oh. What's the hat called? The one that you're wearing?
This is a hat.
Right.
I'm not being facetious. Different countries have different names for them. And, you know, I try to remember them, but it just gets impossible. For a man of my advanced years, I try and just
Right.
the theology. You know, that which I wear around the neck, which is long and sewn down the center and is a Eucharistic garment. It goes around the neck and it goes down the front. You know what I'm referring to.
Yes. Yes.
In Greek, welcome to everybody who's just joining. Let's just see. Louise. Okay. And Tim.
Yes.
Hello, Louise. I'm just
Hi.
People.
No problem.
And admit Thomas. Hey. Hi, Thomas. Is that you, Thomas?
It's connecting to audio.
Oh, it's connecting to audio. Okay. And we have Tim with us as well. All right. I'm very happy that you should be seen, but if you prefer not to be seen, then cameras off. That's fine. Just before we begin, Anna Maria. Oh, here we are. Hi, Thomas. Just before we begin, Anna Maria has asked me, what is this called? The hat. And I just said, well, I call it the hat because I can't remember the Greek, the Romanian, the Russian, and so on and so forth names. But just as a little joke, those who have been to Orthodox services will know the priest wears around his neck a long, a kind of scarf type garment that goes virtually to the floor, and in Orthodoxy is sewn down the middle with buttons, but in the Western tradition those two are separate, the two halves are separate. Now in the Western tradition it is called a stole, S-T-O-L-E. Okay, you'd probably be aware of this. Does anybody know what the Greek word for it is in Orthodoxy? This is an illustration of pointless trivial facts which are just funny when you explain them. Anybody know what the word is in Greek?
Epitrachil. No.
Epitachelion. That's right. Yes. It means the round the neck or round the throat thing. That's just, you know, that's just about as ridiculous as it gets, really. It's the around the throat. A trachea, of course, is here. Epi means around. It just means the around the throat thing. So, you know, when the people think, oh, Orthodoxy is wonderful and exotic because they wear the epitrachelion, it's because we're wearing the round the throat thing. So the truth is very often more mundane. In fact, we have something else that is worn on the knee and indicates whether a priest is able to hear confessions. And that is called the epignation. And guess what that means? It means the on the knee thing. So one thing we should do, welcome to all of us who may be also viewing, I'll explain that in a moment. But the extraordinary thing about Orthodoxy is that everybody thinks it's exotic, but in some things that sound exotic, it's really very mundane. It always tickles me, that. Right, enough of that. Let's just look at the accepted protocols for these meetings, and just warm welcome to everybody. You don't have to speak if you don't want to speak. Does need saying quite clearly. You don't have to contribute. You can just sit there and listen. But I just want to test for this first session between the five of us as new folks together, whether you mind that the session is recorded. Bear in mind, please, that you, one, don't have to say anything if you don't want to. And if you do, you should probably not share anything that you don't want to share, mindful of the fact that it may end up on the internet sometime. Okay. Now, is this going to be a problem for anyone?
No, not for me.
No. Okay. So as I say, the fail-safe here is the fact that you know, if you don't want to share anything at all, that is your prerogative. That's fine. Just want to listen. But if you do share something, you may just want to keep those personal details out of what you might otherwise have considered a private forum. It's not, okay? Because I think that the discussion that we have together could benefit other people very greatly. It could be a great blessing for others. So I think this is why, really, with your permission, I've decided to have it published, broadcasted, whatever. Louise, we seem to have just lost you on video for a moment. Oh, there we are, right, okay. So we've got two foci for our discussion this evening from an Orthodox Christian perspective, and that is the problem of evil, and secondly, the issue of forgiveness. It seems to me that we should start with the problem of evil, so-called, because if we're then talking about forgiveness, it has to be in that context of the existence of suffering in the world, of evil in the world, of sin in personal and social realities. All of this really can be encapsulated by the traditional Christian word for it, the fall, whatever the fall means, and however it may have affected persons or indeed the cosmos as a whole, which is very much Orthodox Christianity's emphasis. The fall affects everything, not just human beings, but the whole of the created order. So with that kind of backdrop, and knowing that this is a huge area, and really we can only scratch the surface tonight, and it might be a tangent to other exchanges that we might have with or without others in the future, shall we make a start? Dostoevsky, great Russian novelist, literary, really, what can you say, he's the Meister of the existential state of human beings in the modern era. And for me, some time ago, since I read the Brothers Karamazov, his wonderful work, but I know now, because Louise contacted me earlier, that we do actually have an expert on the man and his writings, particularly in relation to nihilism. But I think what I'm going to invite Louise to do now is to offer some personal insights that she's gained from Dostoevsky's work, not just Karamazov, but the other works as well, about the human condition and how we grapple with the thorny and difficult situation and of our personal situations and understandings of suffering and of evil in the world. So over to you, Louise. It's entirely up to you how you navigate through these waters, but I'm sure we'll all be blessed and illumined by what you say. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Father. Yeah, I just wanted to give a bit of background, really, as I got a bit excited when you sent over a summary of the Brothers Karamazov, a key text that's influenced me to be here today, really, and my interest in Orthodox Christianity specifically, and how you guys just construe the world. So through picking up Dostoevsky works quite a few years ago, I found that he provides quite a compelling answer to nihilism, to the world as it is today, and the sort of meaningless world in a sense. And his interrogation of nihilism and the world without Christianity and a God and order, the death of God and the positioning of this world really influenced my interest in finding truth and the case he builds for Christianity as well, even though it's not too obvious across his texts, because his diagnosis of the modern world with people not believing in something higher really is quite bleak, as we see across novels such as Crime and Punishment, The Underground Man, and of course Brothers Karamazov, and his powerful and very famous quote, "Without God, everything is permitted," is definitely something that resonates with me today. and yeah, something that just makes me want to search for truth. So just to give a background on maybe the Brothers Karamazov just briefly then, for people that might not have had chance to read the summary that you sent over, what he did in this text was really challenging, and you can spend hours just speaking about certain passages. But I believe he really aimed to make the Christian case against the problem of evil really strong, but also in doing so, he did frame the problem of evil better and more strongly than anyone else could have done. So there's long conversations between the three main brothers: Ivan, an intellectual modern atheist; Alyosha, a devoted practicing monk; and Dmitri, who believes in God, but not as profoundly. So these theological discussions, for probably our purposes today, around innocent suffering, and we see Ivan list atrocities, the worst atrocities, such as child suffering, and go into lots of details about that. So it really highlights the worst cases when it comes to the problem of evil. And reading passages in the book firsthand, especially when I was a few years ago, not making my mind up about atheism and things like that, it might seem that there's no coming back to this problem with a strong case for a benevolent God as a Christian, because Ivan, he just cannot construe how such atrocities could ever be forgiven. And he even says that if we're promised to heaven at the end and everything is going to be great, if that takes the suffering of just one child, he doesn't want it.
That's the key thing, isn't it, really, that I picked up from Dostoevsky: the suffering of one child for the salvation of the world. No.
Yeah, that's it. And yeah, just to summarize that there then, Ivan says, it's not that I don't accept God, I just most respectfully return him the ticket. So he doesn't want a part in the world. And it's not that he doesn't believe that God exists, it's more that he doesn't believe a good God exists because of all the evil in the world. But on the converse of that, Dostoevsky is painting a picture for a religious world here, even though it might not seem so, with the case that Ivan is building for all the horrors that happen, because in response to all this, the characters must strengthen their own religious faith, because it's through the suffering of others, of innocent children, that characters are able to break free of their own selfish desires and just stop focusing on themselves, really. And I think humility comes into it as well. And a lot of the personal suffering we see throughout the novel is from the characters' pride and arrogance. So once they step outside of this and see the suffering of others, I think that's what brings the case for Dostoevsky's Christian world.
Thank you, Louise. I think you mentioned that famous quote of Ivan. I'd like to just read it out. This is where he returns the ticket. I absolutely renounce all higher harmony. It is not worth one tear of even that one tormented child who beat her chest with her little fist and prayed to dear God in a stinking outhouse with her unredeemed tears. Not worth it, because her tears remain unredeemed. They must be redeemed, otherwise there can be no harmony. They have put too high a price on harmony. We can't afford to pay so much for admission, and therefore I hasten to return my ticket. Now, not with that literary prowess in that character, but I'm minded of Stephen Fry, who recently made a declaration of atheism based on the horrors of particular, a particular parasitical infection. And how can we believe in a benevolent God when nature itself contains such horrors? I mean, Dostoevsky in his characters, and particularly in this passage in The Rebel and the Grand Inquisitor, and in this one here, he kind of focuses on the suffering of children, because children are very dear to Dostoevsky personally and in his characters. And this is why he, in a very intense manner, he accentuates, as you've said, Louise, the problem of innocent suffering from the perspective of the torture and murder of children. And, we think, Brady and Myra Hindley, which are obviously across the nation, but just on our doorstep, Louise and Thomas, in the north of England. And these horrors are the same horrors that have been perpetrated against the innocent throughout history. Now, I just want to say something before we open it up to general discussion, because there's a kind of a two-person introduction tonight. And I just want to say about 10 minutes or so on the prophet Job. I just had to get my Bible just a moment. Now, I'm using the Old Testament Septuagint version, so it might be that with the Masoretic text, there are one or two differences in verse numbers. I've not checked that out. Let's just refresh our memory of what kind of a book Job is. Job is a book of wisdom literature. We know in the Old Testament, as we call it, and the Tanakh, as our Jewish brethren call it, there are books of history, of prophecy, of law, and of wisdom. This is a part of the wisdom genre of Old Testament literature. Okay, so it's probably, almost probably, built around the experiences of a particular individual called Job, his wife, the false comforters, his false friends. But a lot of the narrative really weaves a theological theme around his suffering and the reasons for it and the resolution of it. Okay, and so at the beginning, Satan, the devil himself, is portrayed in this story as appearing with the other angels before God. Not, of course, part of his council, because he's having a kind of brief holiday trip out of Hades, out of hell rather, but he's there standing before God. Now, this is quite clearly not an historical account. You know, it's not history as we understand history, because one, who was there to witness it? All right, you could say that it was revealed to Job subsequently. That's quite possible. But the very notion that the devil is anywhere near heaven is just preposterous. I mean, a long time ago, there was a film called The Time Bandits, and the devil tried it on there, and just a small fragment of him got into heaven and it promptly exploded. Well, even though that's silly, it's actually good theology. You know, heaven has no dealings with anything to do with hell. But in the genre of wisdom literature, there is almost like an enacted drama to explore certain religious themes. And the key one in the prophecy of Job, of course, is why do the innocent suffer? And Job is an innocent man, because this is how God defends him, okay, in the beginning of the story. But of course, Satan is permitted to test Job. And this is what it says in chapter 1 and verse 6. Then, as it so happened one day, that behold, the angels of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and the devil also came with them. The Lord said to the devil, "Where do you come from?" So the devil answered the Lord and said, "I came here after going about the earth and walking around under heaven." Then the Lord said to him, "Have you yet considered my servant Job, since there is none like him on the earth, a blameless," it's my emphasis this, "a blameless, true and God-fearing man, and one who abstains from every evil thing?" So the devil answered and said before the Lord, "Does Job worship the Lord for no reason? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his cattle have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all he has, and see if he will bless you to your face." Then the Lord said to the devil, "Behold, whatever he has, I give into your hand, but do not touch him." Thus the devil went out from the Lord. Notice there that God permits the devil to do these things. He's not the author of evil. He allows this situation to develop because he knows, being omniscient, he knows what the resolution will be, but Job doesn't, not yet. So Job goes about and this, that, the other, and he loses everything, and he's subject to terrible disease and all the rest of it. But before that, Job appears for a second time before the Lord. And in chapter 2 and verse 6, sorry, my eyesight's going, chapter 2 and verse 4, sorry, I can't see the little 4, sorry. Then the devil answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin." Notice the cynicism. Notice the negative view of everything. Skin for skin. Whatever a man has, he will pay in full for his life. Yet truly stretch out your hand and touch his bones and his flesh, and see if he will bless you to your face. So the Lord said to the devil, behold, I give him over to you, only spare his life. Thus the devil went out from the Lord and struck Job with malignant sores from head to foot. So he took a potsherd to scrape away the discharge and sat on a dunghill outside the city. When a period, last few verses, but this is really the hit below the waistline as far as Job is concerned. When a period of time passed, his wife said to him, how long will you hold out, saying, behold, I will wait a little longer, looking for the hope of my salvation? You can almost hear Ivan saying those words, can't you? Listen, your memory is wiped out from the earth, your sons and daughters, the pangs and pains of my womb, which I suffered in vain and with hardships. You yourself are sitting down, spending the night in the open air among the rottenness of worms. And I go about as a wanderer and a handmaid from place to place, from house to house, waiting for the setting of the sun, so as to rest from my labors and pains that now beset me. Understand, of course, that a woman without a man in antiquity was grievously economically disadvantaged. This is why the ministry to widows in the early Christian church was so important. As the beginning of feminism. You know that feminism is a Christian creation, don't you? And I know that other people have hijacked it, but the standing and dignity of women was very close to the heart of Jesus and was from the church from the beginning. I'm sorry, that's my interpolation. And the wife goes on, but say a word against the Lord and die. In some versions, curse the Lord and die. Say a word against is curse, isn't it? Yeah. Then Job looked at her and said, you have spoken as one of the foolish women speaks. He didn't say as foolish women. He said one of the foolish women speaks. If we accepted good things from the Lord's hand, shall we not endure evil things? In all these things that happened to him, Job did not sin with his lips before God. Now, for the next 40 chapters, including chapter 3, most of it is about false comforters, his so-called friends, who come to Job and come with various logical arguments about why his fortunes have changed. You know, you must have done something wrong. No, really, you must have done something wrong. You know, God is requiting you for your sins. Yeah, so there's all this kind of very logical, rational, this follows that kind of argument from the brothers. Job throughout protests his innocence because God declared him innocent at the beginning of the story before the devil. He is an innocent and righteous man. But never does he curse God and die, as his wife invited him to do. But all the wonderful thing about Job is that it's so long going through all this nonsense, because books and reams have been written about this problem. A lot of it nonsense, but it ignores the existential condition of those who suffer through no fault of their own. Now, we're not Stoics. We don't say come what may, and maintaining moral integrity in that kind of mere acceptance. If you read the Psalms, you can see that we rage against heaven when evil befalls us innocently. And even when it's sometimes partly our fault, nonetheless, what we experience is disproportionate to the sin. And why do the wicked prosper, the psalmist says? So the protest goes to heaven itself, and rightly so. And sometimes people feel guilty about being angry with God for the fate that befalls them. We don't believe in fate, metaphorical expression. You know, but we should rage against the dying of the light. We should rage against the outrage of a creation in which little children are tortured and die at the hands of others. Okay? Now, the wonderful thing about Job is the fact that we don't get to have a resolution until the very last chapter. And I'm sure you all know this, but I want to try and have Louise's narrative and mine inform each other and give each other some sort of critique, so that we engage the scriptures and we engage the literature of this great Christian man. I'm not going to even I'm going to read the first 6 verses, okay? Then Job answered the Lord, chapter 42. I know you can do all things. It must be said that in chapters 39 through 41, God has been showing Job just how powerless he is compared to his own sovereign power as creator. Okay, that's the context. I repeat, I know you can do all things and nothing is impossible for you. For who is he who hides counsel from you, who keeps back his words and thinks to hide them from you? Who will tell me what I knew not, things too great and wonderful, which I did not know? But hear me, O Lord, that I also may speak. I will ask you, and please teach me. And you've got the humility. Please teach me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I deprecate myself. It's spelled CI here. It's an American publisher. I deprecate myself and I waste away. I regard myself as dust and ashes. Now, the wonderful thing about this, of course, is, well, let's just track them and then I'll be quiet. Job says, wonderful things you do, O Lord. You're going to teach me. I want to hear. Please teach me. That's that basic humility. And then he confesses his ignorance. But it's an existential ignorance. He says, I have heard of you by the hearing of ear, but now my eye sees you. In other words, he's not just having nice stories about the Lord read to him in the Bible by his mom or his dad or his friends. He's not just thinking this is what God did for Israel in the Exodus. He's not just hearing the stories, the great and wonderful stories of the people of God, as if they were kind of just simply a narrative, an inspiring narrative, an engaging and an exciting narrative, but it's not become personal for him. Only through his suffering does the liberation from slavery and suffering and death in Egypt become personal to him. Only when he experiences what the prophets who were persecuted for telling the truth to kings experienced, does he then realize this is already in my experience, because I'm simply trying to be faithful to God, come what may. And so therefore, he repents in dust and ashes. But are we told in 42, as it wends its way to the end of the book, are we actually told in 42 what his illumination is, what his discovery is, what wisdom he has achieved through enduring this vale of sorrow? The beauty of Job is, no, we are not told. And you may say, how come? Well, you know, shouldn't we know what the happy ending is? It's lineaments, its exact characteristics, so that we can learn for ourselves. But that's the point, isn't it? You cannot do any of this unless you learn for yourself. The Buddha was once asked by one of his disciples to teach the way of enlightenment. Since the great master Siddhartha Gautama had achieved enlightenment, wouldn't he want to share that with his disciples? And the Buddha refused and said, no, you must follow your own path to enlightenment. Right? So this theme truly is universal. It's actually saying that our relationship with God, our personal relationship with God, and as a people within society, because it's not just individualism, but our personal encounter with God gives us that wisdom to maintain our faith even in the face of innocent suffering, even the innocent suffering of others. And so much of our debate about the problem of evil is become theoretical, abstract. You know, learned tomes have been written about it, but more is said in these chapters of Karamazov than has been said in volumes, I think, over the centuries, and particularly A Prophet for Our Age. Because I think it was his last great work, and I think he discerned the gathering storm of ideological atheism in Holy Russia. He must have sensed that. The fathers of Doctrina sensed that. Okay, but we're not sensing the devil at our door. You know, we're not in our own age sensing that crippling nihilism, that crippling commodification of human beings. When we've even become desensitized to the destruction of our environment because we think that somehow we've attained to Promethean powers over creation itself, which is the primal sin of Eden, of course. So there, I rest my case. So Louise and I, sorry that was a bit longer than yours, Louise, but the two of us, I think, have presented a biblical narrative and a narrative of a great Christian literary giant, Dostoevsky. I think obviously Louise would join me in saying, take some time. And it is a very rich and powerful and intense work. Take some time to read Karamazov and explore the characters and how they grapple with modern life and with the existence of suffering and evil in their own lives. Wonderful. Okay, I'm just going to offer it open now to the rest of us for any comments or insights or reactions that you might have had to what Louise has said first, and then you can offer a few reactions to what I said. Of course, we can cross-reference what we've both said. But I want each of us to have an equal slice of the discussion. So does anybody want to address anything to Louise in terms of what she said about the characters in Karamazov? And perhaps you don't know the work at all. Perhaps you want to explore a bit more about how he handles the suffering of the innocent, particularly children. Over to you.
I wanted to make a remark on the article that you sent, actually, which is linked to the Brothers Karamazov. So a line struck me there. There is no other, because in the world, yes, there is suffering, and we always think it's someone else's problem, but we don't think enough about how we're all connected and how one's prayer can affect another in the world. And also, when Jesus came and he healed the blind man or the paralytic, he could have just healed everyone at once because he had that power. But he chose to heal one person at a time. And I think that's because there is a human element in the salvation. So he wants each other, well, he wants people to help each other, and then he does his work as well, but always hidden and never claiming glory for himself. So this idea of us being interconnected is, I think, what I want to point out.
Yes. My salvation is in the other. This has been explored by Metropolitan John Zizoulis, and a lot of the personalism of John Zizoulis is reflected also in what's his name? The I-Thou philosophy. Martin, can't remember his name now. Oh, that's bad of me. I did this at theological college at seminary. But my salvation is in my brother. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? It's in Genesis. You know, Cain's complaint, or rather to God, is, am I my brother's keeper? And that's already the result of sin, to consider that the other is not my responsibility.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Anybody like to offer anything else on what Louise has said, by way of a truth that is derived either from this consideration of innocent suffering, or maybe something bit of a tangent to that will still illuminate what we're looking at here? Remember, we're talking about the problem of evil in the world. And of course, we can't really do that in a thorough study unless we look at the biblical data in relation to Genesis, how the Orthodox Christian Church handles the theme of the fall, of original sin, and so on and so forth, because there are huge differences between Orthodox Christianity, which I'm sure most of you know, and the way in which the rest of Christianity understands these things. Including, for example, I'll just give you a quick example, the mark of Cain. The mark of Cain is not an act of punishment, but an act of protection, lest others turn on him as being the original murderer. You know, the angel that guards the path to paradise, to Eden, to the garden, is there to exclude, because if we were to enter and eat from the tree of life, then we would bring eternal death upon ourselves. So our expulsion from Eden, from paradise, is necessary for our salvation. It's not an act of punishment, just in the same way that the mark of Cain is not an act of punishment. It's the act of a benevolent God. All right, okay. You were about to open your mouth then, Thomas, I think, were you?
No, but basically what I sort of deduced from it was that Dostoevsky sort of like flipped it on its head, the case that innocent suffering should be a reason for not believing in God, as he sort of makes the case that human suffering is sort of like a human trait that it should be shared, and it should sort of expose like a radical form of humility for the other person rather than neglect. It should highlight the case that we are all one and sort of enhance the sort of brotherhood of man sort of thing. But I haven't read Dostoevsky. That's just sort of what I've
But if you take that thought, Tom, and you say, let's look at our society, well, it's not just in the West, but that's where we are. If we look at our society in the West, what social movements and ideas and constructs of our life in society, famously, of course, Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society, but and I think in that, she's reflecting the common view of many in the West, that we're an aggregate of individuals with individual aspirations, and therefore our responsibility is strictly towards ourselves and our immediate family. And of course, the trouble with heresy is that it always deals with a partial truth, because as the English proverb has it, charity does begin at home, but it doesn't end at home. No, we can't neglect it. We can't neglect our family, but neither can we neglect the vast majority of the world, for example, at the moment, that's not had one vaccination against COVID, never mind 2 or 3. You know, the idea that we can somehow separate our lives, whether in terms of the destruction of the biosphere, through ecological damage, or the way in which we pursue economic goals, the cost of the suffering of others who supply batteries for our mobile phones. And we know what happens in Africa to make that the case, to make that happen, with the metals that are used in mobile phones. You know, all these issues cluster around the basic idea, am I my brother's keeper? And, you know, we've got to say, if our salvation is in others, and in fact the whole world, because Christ came to die, not as Calvin supposed, for the elect, but Christ came to die for the whole world. So therefore, everything that we have to think about as human beings and our flourishing must be in the context of our responsibilities to each other. I know I've answered my own question, but I don't know if anyone else to pick that up and run with it, because it's actually in the application of these biblical and literary truths that we begin to look at the world with fresh eyes. We don't just see God as he is, we actually see the world as he sees it. Once we begin to see God as he is, he gives us the vision to see the world as it truly is, rather than this artifice, this kind of simulacrum, this deadly copy of the world that the devil tries to insinuate into human affairs. Remember in the temptation of Christ, when the devil shows Christ the whole world and says, this is mine, I give it to you, if you will fall down and worship me. 2 things. That's about idolatry, isn't it? To suggest that the world belongs to the devil, because 2, it's not in the devil's gift anyway. 3, the devil is terminally stupid if he thinks that Christ is going to fall for that one. In fact, for anyone. But we fall for it. You know, we think, as the great prophet Frank Sinatra said, I did it my way, you know. We think that we are autonomous agents morally, whereas in fact, that's the primal sin of Eden. You know, the devil said to Adam and Eve, you know, God, I'll paraphrase, God's just jealous of your human potential to know the difference between good and evil. You know, he doesn't want you. This is the Promethean myth, isn't it? You know, Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and the gods getting angry. The gods, this is pagan. This is the old pagan notion that humans are in a transaction of power, a power relationship with deities who are fickle. This is the Olympian ideal, isn't it? And, you know, when Stephen Fry says he can't believe in Judeo-Christian tradition anymore, and he said this, and in fact he's published a book subsequently based on this idea, but the Olympian deities are far more attractive because they reflect human life and passions and desires, and, you know, vicious gods having it out against someone else, and then terrible things happening and wonderful things happening. It's a kind of celestial soap opera. Well, that's just a projection of a life without God, isn't it, onto the canvas of heaven. And no wonder the Greeks said, oh, this philosophy, Justin Martyr, remember the guy who came and asked him to explain as a philosopher why did he embrace this Jewish prophet Christ. You know, Justin Martyr was able to explain how the most wonderful insights of the philosophers had actually imparted in the Greek people a search for truth, and behold, here is the truth. And that's how the Greek nation was converted. I mean, successively over many generations, but you see what I'm saying. So where are we with, and this is my question, which I will leave with you. Where are we with this society now? How do we handle it? How do we show people a better way? Shall I offer something? I think, first of all, we need people of integrity, hopefully Christians, but people of other faiths as well, and none. We need people of integrity in our political system. Because the cynicism about our governance is a result of the betrayal of our trust, not generally amongst all politicians, but against a lot, and I'm not making a party political point here, but against those who have the honor and gift from us of governance to realize that they are truly accountable to the people. But more than that, they're accountable to, if you want to use this silly word, a higher power. You know, there is a sense of obligation to a moral order that is not defined by lawyers or historians, but is defined by something ineffable and universal, and not to be contained within any particular political ideology. You know, if we could only get our politicians to understand that it's not just reading the tabloids to see whether they should do A, B, or C. It's not just a political adjustment to how many votes they can get in the Commons. It's actually saying, what should we do according to the values, the historic values of our society? Now, that's just politics. But I mean, how do we apply the same principle to our economic affairs at the local level, to industry, to the public sector? How do we apply it to small businesses? How do we apply it to our own desire for advancement in our own fields, our own godly ambition to make the best of our lives, to take those talents that God has given us and make them fruitful, not just for ourselves and our families, but for others as well? And I honestly think that as a society, we're losing it. I'm not sort of beating my breast and saying, oh, it's all gone, we can't do anything about it, you know, it's all terrible, it's all going to end soon anyway. I'm not one of those people. I think there are practical things that we can do. Maybe one of those innocent children that's got leukemia, that's now struggling to get to the top of a list to get into hospital for tests, might actually survive if we attended to how we resource the health sector at the moment and save that innocent suffering from their parents and their friends. There are practical things that we can do to show our solidarity with each other in alleviating each other's pains. So I think, and I don't think we're going to have time for forgiveness tonight, but we'll just have a think about that. I think that, yeah, this is a program for action. And it's very interesting that the early Bolsheviks were very often sons and daughters of priests. Did you know that? Not a few of them actually had active Christian families as their background, but they had got impatient with what the Christian vision promised and what was actually being delivered in society. And perhaps because they were not properly formed in the Christian faith to understand the clawing nature of evil and how it besets every noble endeavor, they thought that they truly could, to use an English expression, create Jerusalem in this green and pleasant land. You know, they truly had their own Russian version of that kind of messianic utopianism, which became a political doctrine under Lenin. But then, of course, along comes Stalin, and everybody begins to realize, those who have the courage to look carefully at what's going on, that that social idealism has been compromised once again by toxic power relations, by people in the party who want to micromanage every aspect of human life and who are so insistent on maintaining their own power base that anything is permitted, again to quote Dostoevsky, that anything, any sacrifice is both possible and desirable to keep the system in place. So yet another idol is erected on the throne of God. And, you know, a lot of these people like Dostoevsky saw it coming. I'm convinced about that. If you read some of the Optina Fathers, you can see that their sense of the gathering storm. And I don't think that we should think in our own nation and in our own world, maybe Marxism won't return, this kind of crippling dogmatic idea. But I think that something else could well be round the corner. And as, you know, I know Churchill's a rather difficult person to quote nowadays, but one of the good things that he said was that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. But how will we be vigilant unless we can see and hear and speak and act before it's too late? I'm sorry, I'm just talking over the silence.
No,
it's a problem I have, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that usually Christians don't really like having positions of power, so maybe that's one of the problems.
They what? Sorry, Anna Mary. They're not used to it.
We don't like having grand positions of power because we're trying to practice humility. So maybe that's one of the problems.
Many are, perhaps most are, but the problem is when individuals who have lost that basic message of self-abasement, of lack of egotism, that God might be all and in all, they've not really got it as a personal message. And so consequently, there are people in the church, in the Orthodox Church, in all religious traditions and none, who do become corrupted.
Yeah, I remember I recently watched a film about Saint Nectarius of Egina, and the people wanted him to become a patriarch, but he didn't want that position. And I think one of the lines in the films was that a position like that is one of power that slowly eats at you until there's nothing left. So there is a danger. Well, of course, there's a responsibility to help the other, but then how you help them is a question of whether, if a position of power would actually help the other, or can you do something from where you are? Yeah, maybe that's also something to think about.
I remember, you know, like, is it Wałęsa? I can never pronounce the Polish properly. The leader of Solidarność in Poland, when the regime fell. You probably none of you were born when this happened. It's before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and he was once interviewed by a journalist. He led the union movement to overthrow basically the communist regime in Poland, which is a client state of Russia, of course, at the time, Soviet Russia. And he was asked some question by a journalist about his position as leader of this movement. And he said a very interesting and powerful thing. He said, without my Christian faith, I would be possibly a very, very dangerous man. So, you know, one dictator gives way to another dictator. And you can see this throughout human history, you know. So I think that a Jewish gentleman who used to come to our lectures at Manchester Metropolitan University many years ago, which were organised at that time. And we were talking about the moral order and religion generally. And he said that he thought it very important that bad men were prevented from attaining to positions of leadership in any religion. And you could say in any political party for that matter. So it's not just a question of populism, who is the most popular person, because people could, I mean, Nuremberg shows that how, you know, the rallies show how people can be corrupted easily by a charismatic leader. Adolf Schicklgruber, his real name. I always like to refer to him by his real name. It's just like Stalin wasn't baptized Stalin. he wanted the title Steel, Man of Steel, you see. So people can be corrupted. So populism, and arguably you could see this happening with a certain gentleman in America recently, populism is no guarantee of truth and dignity and integrity. But on the other hand, I think we want to kind of avoid Plato's idea in the Republic that society should be run by the elite.
I was just going to mention Plato then as a contrary to that, but then that's a bit challenging to as an alternative anyway. So
yeah, because, you know, how do, I mean, the elite necessarily fight amongst themselves, you know, and that's part of the scientific method in science, that, you know, the ideas are contested. But how could that give, you know, anybody, you know, a cabal of scientists couldn't rule the country just as much as a cabal of artists couldn't, you know, because they have their own specialisms and ideas, but it's not something that covers the whole of society. So people of integrity need to be good leaders. I think leaders need to take people with them. They need, I was told that it doesn't actually happen, that it's an urban myth or a rural myth, that in a wolf pack, the leader of the pack sometimes will go to the back to make sure that stragglers are not left behind. And it may not be actually true, but I think there is truth in it.
There's an influencer that I sometimes watch talks from called Simon Sinek, and he started talking about how leadership is in fact compassion, and it's not a question of how do you get the most out of your workers, is how do you help your workers be their best selves, and then as a result you get the best work done. Yeah. So I think mentalities like that will definitely help shape at least the work industry and then the rest of the.
Because at the heart of that is the idea of the dignity of the person, and that you only get the best out of people when they can flourish in whatever they do. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Good. And I think we should wrap up now, because we're given an hour over to this session, and you know, I think we've got a lot to chew on there. Now there will not be a session. I'm not expecting people here to turn up every time at all. You send me an email to be invited to whatever session you want to come to. If there isn't a topic already, then of course you'll be signing up blind, or you bring your own topic. If there is a topic already, I will let you know. So I'm here to tell you that there will not be one next Tuesday night, because we have a liturgy, a Eucharist in church, a Vespral liturgy for the following day, which is the presentation of Christ in the temple. In English, it's called Candlemas, was in the Middle Ages. I like that, bringing light into the world. Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace. You know, a light to enlighten the Gentiles. Yeah. So that's the liturgy next Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock in church, which will be broadcasted as well. But the following Tuesday, that's a fortnight, on the February the 8th, there will be one. And one of the attendees will almost certainly be a guy from our church called Aaron Malloy, who's a theological student. He's doing theology at the Nazarene College He's Orthodox, but he's doing his theology there. We don't have, unfortunately, an Orthodox Institute in Manchester, although we do have one in Cambridge and other courses. So Aaron is doing his degree there, and he's asked a question about iconoclasm. So what I thought we'd do on the February the 8th is look at forgiveness first of all, because you brought that up, didn't you, Louise? And, you know, you can put into the pot the sort of things that you want to discuss. I mean, you have already with me, you know, how can we forgive those who commit the most heinous crimes? Do we have the right to forgive those who commit heinous crimes? Who does have the right to commit those? Who has the right to forgive? And so on and so forth. You know, we can't forgive the Nazis on behalf of the Jews. Not that the Jewish nation, you know, Israel or the Jewish people themselves collectively could appropriate that, although personally they might. So all these issues connected with forgiveness, which are linked to theodicy, we can consider first. And then in the second half, we can look at iconoclasm. Now, of course, iconoclasm, the destruction of images and art generally, is not something limited to Christianity. You see it in Islam, you see it in other religious traditions, not just in Islam and Christianity, but in others and in other ideologies as well, even. So I think we need to get to the root of why people feel constrained to destroy images and symbols and art for the sake of some sort of doctrine or higher purpose or whatever. You know, what is that urge to destruction? Because that's what iconoclasm is. It's not just saying, oh, I don't agree with that. It's actually taking a hammer to it, you know. So where does that urge to destroy come from? Okay, does that seem interesting? Right, there we are. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. And on the basis of this recording, to everyone who will perhaps view it online, I've got to explore how to do that. I'll probably have to upload it to YouTube. Take forever, but there we are. I've got a fast connection, but these things take a long time. But this has been a very exciting and I think for me informative session for you. I hope it has for you. So God bless you, and until I see you next time. Thank you very much and good night.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.